أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا وعظيمنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، وليجعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. ما صلى على. We began on the first night talking about the art of Islamic thinking in the context of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all that it entails. We went onto the next portion of my three-part series referring to the art of Islamic thinking in regards to the laws of Allah Jalla wa Ala. In this third part, we want to discuss the art of Islamic thinking when it comes to the topic of akhlaq. Akhlaq being one of the reasons why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, the Holy Prophet, came to mankind. In a very famous hadith, which is said by all Muslims across the world, that verily I was sent to perfect the moral character of mankind. In the verse I mentioned, it's probably, to any scholar's estimation, one of the most beautiful verses in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, certainly for you, in Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, is the best example for one who looks and longs for Allah and the day, the hereafter, and who remembers Allah a lot. And tonight's discussion will be around Islamic thinking in the regard of akhlaq, and we're going to explore all of the ab'ad of what akhlaq is, or at least a few. But before we begin, inshallah, for those viewing online and here in this place, ay salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's worth mentioning that akhlaq is a dimension of Islam that goes hand in hand with the laws of Islam and its beliefs. And that akhlaq is one of the most important aspects. Of course, we can't take away from the importance of law or belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for all of them, you can say it's like a trinity, that they work hand in hand. And the above ayah indicates a few things to us. One of the things it indicates is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding, or rather giving us an indication that the best example is found in Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And we find that the people in the time of Rasulullah, when the Muslims, the new Muslims in his time, followed his actions and words, they became an honorable people. They went from a people that were interested in pleasure, in seeking their wealth and women and drinking lots of alcohol. People that would bury their daughters because they valued the male higher than the female. They became a people of honor, people of high dignity. Their words were the words of a prophet. Whenever they spoke, they were words of wisdom. And we find that if you look in history, in Muslim history, whenever the Muslims left the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, from the east to the west, whenever the Muslims leave Rasulullah, you find that they enter hardship and their nations are destroyed. In fact, there's a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. He says that should the Muslims leave their religion, the affairs of their religion, Allah will place oppressors as their leaders. If you want to look at Muslim nations that had failed as a collective, Look at the Muslim nations that are being ruled by oppressors of today. For it is on the people to select their leader. And it is upon people that if they have a bad leader, to rise against the bad leader. So you find the nations, the more they apply Islam in their life, the more izzah they have, more dignity they have. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi came with a design for dignity of not just the Muslims, but for mankind itself. Now one may ask, what was the secret of Islam remaining in the hearts of people? The holiness of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi remaining in the hearts of people. That a quarter of humanity today, at least, at the very least, despite the many differences between many schools in Islam, they all agree on the holiness of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. They all believe in Islam as a religion in their hearts. You find, even myself, when I mix with people in the community and I sit with the youth, you find some of the brothers, they go to clubs and they drink and they dance and they do all sorts of haram. But ask them to eat pork and they say no. They still keep an iota there. And we might find this amusing that they might keep this iota there, but it is these little things, you collect them over the years, they might bring a person back. And it is very common. A lot of the brothers that I went to high school with that weren't religious eventually came around. If they didn't come around, they still had respect for religion in their heart. I met one brother who left religion completely. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, he used to drink and do all sorts of things. But if you visited him in his house and said, I'd like to pray, the prayer mat was ready. And he'd tell everyone, be quiet, he's going to pray. He still had a level of respect. This is something that I believe is unseen in other people and other practices. That even the worst of the Muslims still have an endearing attachment to their religion, even if they don't practice it. Whereas others, they look at their religion as an ornament. The only time, for example, I go to church is a birth, death, or marriage. I hear this saying a lot. So what is this secret? What is it that makes Islam so appealing, that it stays in the hearts and minds of people? What was the Prophet's approach with people that the world has not seen his example? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi had two great qualities. One of them is jam' al-kalima wa ihtidan al-jami'. He had a consensus of opinion with people. He brought people to a common word, and he brought people together. Another quality he had, and this is irrespective of whether they're Muslim or not. He said, the scholars rather, they say, he had al-afu wa tajawaz an al-isa'a. That he would forgive and he would move beyond offensive or hurtful acts. One of the greatest qualities of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi is that people in the time of the advent of Islam that would hurt him and maim him and his family in battles or in person, and they would call him names and throw trash on him, these same people, he would give them mercy when Islam would conquer not by the sword but by the hearts. When we want to summarize the importance of akhlaq, or your own behavior or ethics towards a person, and in respect to the Prophet's pardoning of people, there's a hadith that says, ثُلْثَيْنَ الْأَخْلَاقِ التَّغَافُلِ, that 2/3 of good behavior to people is ignoring a lot of what they do. So the Prophet was a person of, in the sense of akhlaq at-taghaful. He would look beyond what people do. He'd act like it wasn't there. And the Prophet, despite the difference in people, and this is a very important point for anyone that is paying attention online and in person, the most important thing about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi was that he was merciful to all different types of people. In fact, he would accord all types according to their own selves from what appeared outwardly from them. If the Prophet was to engage with a simpleton or a farmer, he'd speak to him in the language that he understands. If he spoke to the scholar, he spoke to him in a language that he understands. If he spoke to the rich man, he spoke to him in a language he understands, and the examples are many. He was a man with a goal. He wanted to take people min al-dhulumati ila nur, from the multitudes of darknesses to, not to anwar, to nur. In the Quran al-Kareem, he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes you from dhulumat, from darknesses, ila nur, to light, because there is only one type of light. And it is worth mentioning that the first nur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created was the nur of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. You'll find that the approach of Rasulullah was a breathing approach. He would breathe in, breathe out. He'd bring people in, and certain people he'd push away. Not by virtue of his harshness towards them, but he attracted certain people, and certain people were repelled by his very nature. So a question is raised, how is it that he can unite if he has a push and pull sort of effect? For example, when he brings in the sincere, by virtue, the insincere are pushed away from him. When he brings in the believer, the hypocrite is pushed away. There is a mismatch. When he brings in the peaceful, the violent of the people are pushed away. But still, you'll notice that despite the difference of people around him, his encompassing mercy, his ability to bring different styles of people under the one guise are many. An example of this, which is very interesting, a lot of people don't know, that some of his ashab, they would pray with him in the mosque, then they would go to their homes and worship idols. And he was knowing of this. He pardoned this because he had the goal of bringing people together under the same guise, the guise of Islam. So he would pardon even idol worship until they understood what Islam actually meant. In fact, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he had access to the ghaib through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he knew of many future events. He knew of many people that would go against Islam in the future, that would kill people from his family in the future, and he didn't punish them before they committed the crime. In fact, one person said to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, why don't you punish this person? You know what they're going to do. He said, I'm not going to be of the people that they say Muhammad punishes his own ashab, his companions. I cannot be known for this. I have to pardon at the moment. There's a greater goal. There's one author, he mentions that the secrets of Islam, as we mentioned before, is that the ability was to gather people, not because they all believed. And this is an interesting point. Not everyone believed in Islam who outwardly accepted Islam or who lived under the umbrella of Rasulullah. But they acknowledged that the government that he established was one that would consult with its people. It was a government that listened. And he was a leader that was merciful and caring and understanding. People had the ability to go and speak to the Hakim. If you look at the Arabs in their history, not anyone can go to the Hakim. Not anyone can approach the leader. Not any person can go walk into the office of the president and complain. In the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, women would go to him and complain about their husbands. To this extent, if a husband had an issue with his wife, they'd go to Rasulullah. Yani, you have to consider, if you're an Australian and you're having an issue with your own finances, an issue with your spouse, and you go to Scott Morrison. Is this even possible? Not saying he's a reference to go to, but is this even possible? There are many doors before the leader. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi had a government where the doors were open. Anyone could approach him. So therefore, people that didn't even believe, they saw the difference. That even if they saw him just as an Arab leader, his leadership was different, and we know that we're protected under his leadership. In fact, many of the ashab would give their opinion during a talk with Rasulullah. They know he receives wahi. They know that Allah talks to him directly. But they would give their opinion, and the Prophet would receive their opinion. In fact, in Mecca, the Prophet gave leadership. The wali of Mecca was a youth. And he gave him a golden advice. He said, أحسن لمحسنهم وتجاوز عن مسيئهم. He said, exceed in goodness to the good of them and forgive the bad from the bad of them. This was a sentence for the style of leadership, for this young man to rule the holy city of Mecca, which is another point that the Prophet gave leadership to the youth. Despite 20 years of animosity in the beginning, he preached Islam over 23 years. 20 years of animosity, and he treated people consistently in this manner. Mercy, compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. So from this akhlaq that he had وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. They moved to Islam in droves. People were enamored with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And you know, this is rational. See, for rulership, if you wanted to have a longevity, it's never through the sword or an army. And this is the reason why Islam remained in the hearts of people. The hearts accepted Islam and they took a shelter under its roof. It was spread with mercy, not with terrorism, not with fear, not with force. The sword and arrow have a short shelf life. The leader who leads with the sword, when the sword is lifted, when the military is removed, so is his leadership. However, if you help the poor and the needy, and you're there for people, you know, there's one aspect that a lot of people might not see the Prophet as, but we know that it's mentioned he was a businessman. People weren't just interested in deen. In fact, people wouldn't have looked at the Prophet if you couldn't offer them a change in their lifestyle. They needed work, they needed housing. A lot of the time when we refer to the Prophet's command to send the companions to Ethiopia, because there is a just king who is a Christian, people think this is so beautiful. This is such a beautiful aspect of Rasulullah, that he had an acknowledgement of a person of another religion, and he sent the Muslims there for their amnesty. One aspect we forget is it cost money. The amount of camels and water and food to go into Ethiopia from the Arab world, it cost money. He had to raise money. He had to put people into work. Because he provided employment, and he gave to the poor, and he gave people their own dignities, women their dignity. Women had a say. For once, women had a say. Children had esteem and affection from their fathers. This was his sunnah. This is what he taught. This is what kept Rasulullah in the hearts of people. And as we mentioned in previous lectures, every hour of every day, the minarets roar with the saying or declaration, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. You know, what's interesting is that it's easy for the Muslims to talk about the Prophet and to praise him. But sometimes we need to get outside of Islam, outside of the fold of our bias towards Rasulullah. At the end of the day, we have a bias. We are raised with his name. We're taught his lessons. There is a very interesting author. His name is, if you want to look this up, he wrote a book called The 100 Most Influential People. The author is Michael H. Hart, and he published this book in, if my memory serves me correctly, 1978. Out of the 100 people he had in his book of the most influential, and this book, it did not talk about the moral character of a person. He didn't care. He only spoke about influence. So it could include good people and bad people. And he came up with a deduction that was so controversial at the time. He said, out of the 100 people he has studied, the number one most influential human being to walk this earth, according to this scholar and his estimation, was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. He said he was successful, supremely successful in religion and secular realms of life as well. He wasn't just a religious leader, he was a statesman. He was a warrior. He was a scientist. He had an economist. He had every aspect of human life covered. If just to put into context, we're saying, according to this man's book, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more influential than Sir Isaac Newton. And the understanding of Isa alayhi salam, according to the Christians, more important than Isa, more influential than Buddha and Confucius and Albert Einstein. I've only named a few. He believes that the Prophet was more influential than these people I've just mentioned. You cannot go to school without learning extensively about Sir Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein for the benefit they've given mankind. And he's saying, Rasulullah, this person who's not even my Prophet, I believe is more influential. The word akhlaq itself is from khulq. It's your disposition. It's how the human relates to another person. And the akhlaq of a person or the khulq of a person is a resource of that person's soul. It's a second nature thing. We find people, the instant they enter the door, smiles, Salaam alaikum, alaikum salam, how are you, how's things? They take interest in you, they engage you. This is second nature to them. We say these people have akhlaq, these people have disposition. Now, there are a few levels of this. Now, we know that good manners, not everyone has good manners. Some people, they need to work on their manners. So some people have to exercise practice. They realize I have a temper issue, I'm a bit angry. Some people, subhanAllah, they're born and they're very relaxed. And some people have to take note of this. And in particular, they have to wake up in the morning and they say, okay, today I'm doing a musharata. I'm going to give myself conditions on things I can't do today. And then throughout the day, a muraqabah. They have to watch themselves. And then at the end of the day, a mu'ataba. They have to, blame themselves for the things that they did wrong, give themselves a score, and they have to move on to the next day, and they repeat it. Eventually this becomes a malaka, it becomes a resource in the soul, and then this becomes part of your khulq. And if you practice this enough, people say that this is part of your akhlaq. So in that respect, our habits have a big role to play in Islam, and how we treat others has a huge role to play. Now we find that good human qualities are pegged in 4 things. And our scholars, they've really broken down with a lot of effort what all human qualities, the good human qualities we have, they must be pegged into 4 things. And if you have a 5th, please let me know, because this is beautiful, it's very comprehensive. They say the first quality, or the first anchor rather, of goodness in a person is wisdom. You have to have correct judgment in your mind. And that theoretical wisdom, that wisdom of the mind, has to be practical wisdom. That you have hikmah, and then you act upon it. If you don't have wisdom, it is difficult for you to have good akhlaq with people. You need to be wise, you need to be understanding. When you meet people, you see your disposition, your position in relation to them. Who are they? Where are they from? What's their background? How should I engage them in conversation? And then how do I engage them in conversation? The second is chastity. Chastity as in to refrain from poor sexual conduct. Or rather, and also further to watch one's gaze and stop your inflaming of your desire. You cannot be a person of akhlaq if your desire is everywhere. That if you're a man and you can't have a healthy conversation, a necessary conversation with the opposite sex. To have akhlaq, you need valor as well. The third quality, which is courage. Sometimes akhlaq isn't just being a nice person. Sometimes akhlaq means that you stand up and you're courageous. You speak of what is moral. This is also part of your akhlaq. And also a sense of justice, that you're fair and you are moral. Now, of course, akhlaq is universal, and a person can have akhlaq without having any iman. However, akhlaq to be rewarded in the hereafter, of course, he needs to have iman. I remember there's a brother who was telling me a nice story. That, he's a practicing brother, and he goes to work and he says, look, I don't talk about religion at work. At work, there are 2 things you can't talk about: politics and religion. And also climate change, and also vaccinations, and all sorts of things that are very controversial in the workplace. But they knew he was a Muslim, and this was enough. One day, he was talking to a colleague. This colleague was the son of a millionaire. So this colleague of his, he lives inside the northern beaches. He's very well off. He's lived, he's eaten from a silver spoon his entire life. He said to this brother, just being around you makes me want to be a better person. And he asked this brother, he'll say, that is the best thing I've ever heard from someone. And I don't know what I'm doing. They notice he doesn't swear. They notice he doesn't go to the pub. They notice that the content of his character is clean. He's sincere when he works. He's kind. He forgives people at work. This same brother had a conflict at work. Someone was very rude to him. And a few business leaders, they valued him and they said, we don't want you to go, please, and they were pleading with him. And he said, I'm not even upset at what the person said to me. I'm not upset. And they were shocked. And this person was yelled at and screamed at by a new colleague. And it's very interesting. Just him being a Muslim, being a Shia, having the akhlaq of Muhammad wa al Muhammad, had such a profound effect on people. Aflaha man salla ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You know, it's very interesting if you want to get into akhlaq in terms of the Western sense. There's a book written in 1936 by an author named Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie, you probably would have seen an institute called the Carnegie Institute. And this is an institution which develops the akhlaq of people in a variety of aspects of their life, in business, leadership, etc. And he wrote a very famous book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I was going through a few of his notes, and what he's done basically, he's catalogued all the influential people of this earth that we know of, and he looked at their lives, and he looked at the type of akhlaq that they have, and he wanted to see what was common. So basically he's made a summary of all these things. So the people of the past a few hundred years, as much as he could get his hands on, and they would say he was a prolific reader. And he had a few advices. So in terms of handling people, there was a few techniques, he named 3. One technique is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Another was give honest and sincere appreciation to people. And the third was arouse in the other person an eager want. I look at these 3 qualities. So this is like the summary of all of these successful people. They definitely have these 3 qualities. They don't criticize or condemn people or complain. Then you look at the life of Rasulullah, see where he's having this attitude, where he's critical and he puts people down. He would give advice in private in such a gentle way, just as to not offend the person. Give honest and sincere appreciation. The Prophet taught us, if you thank Allah, you must thank His abd. This is another quality of Rasulullah. Arouse in the other person an eager want. He aroused in them the want for akhirah, Jannah, reward, in this world and in the next. These are 3 qualities. It's just amazing how his summary of all the great successful people of earth were already present in someone who preceded all of these people, which is in the qualities of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And it's interesting, and I'm a bit conscious of time, and there are plenty of notes to go through. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he even taught us, there's one lesson, that your akhlaq in this world can even impact your children's lives, even if you don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And your akhlaq in this world can have an effect on your akhirah. There's a very famous story of the Arabs, a fellow named Hatim al-Ta'if, my memory serves me. And he was known, although he never believed in the Prophet, and he was a mushrik, and he died a mushrik, he was very generous. He was very giving, and he had good manners. The Prophet tells us that his place is in Jahannam, but he's not punished. That Allah has no reason to punish this man. But he didn't have the criteria. He didn't have the ticket. He didn't have the pass to go into heaven, but because of his goodness and his generosity, Allah doesn't punish him. In fact, there's a hadith that says that a person who is generous in this world, even if they don't believe, there is goodness for their children in this world. So people that are generous and are giving to others and they don't believe, their children will see khair in their life, inshaAllah. So it shows you that there are benefits to akhlaq that go beyond just yourself and your circle. It has a profound impact. And the fact that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, his akhlaq was the reason why people glued to Islam. In fact, they only believed in him because they called him the trustworthy one, the honest one. In a time where the Arabs were the kings of deception, they would stab you on the back at the drop of a hat. This man in the time of Jahiliyyah was known as a person who was honest, and they believed him in that respect. So you'll find that everything crucial in Islam was on the wings of his akhlaq. And had he not had akhlaq, had he had any bad qualities in himself, no one would have believed in him, and we wouldn't be here today in memory of his grandson, Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Aflaha man salla ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's important to know that in the ayah it says that there is a great example in Rasulullah, and in particular with the youth. You have to understand that if you are not following someone, you're following someone else. Human beings by their very nature follow. We follow our fathers, we follow Instagram influencers, we follow musical artists, we follow scholars, We always follow by our very nature. And the youth, they're suffering an idol worship that they don't notice. There is the idol of musicians. We're actually told in hadith that a person who goes to a concert and has this affection towards the musical artist and they lean towards them, they've worshipped them. I remember when I was younger, the rap artist who was famous at the time was Tupac Shakur. And to know the level of impact he had on my community, I lived in Guildford. A lot of people don't realize that one artist can have a profound impact on society. If you go back to the 80s, it was Madonna, for sure. In fact, in uni, we had to study Madonna. Because she single-handedly took the children of the 60s, who were tired of their parents and the hippie movement and the drug abuse, and also the trauma of the people that came back from the Vietnam War. They were traumatized, and this generation wanted a better life. In America, there was a boom in economy. In the 80s, it was booming. In our study of Madonna, they say she single-handedly took that generation back into cocaine. Single-handedly, through her music. When I was growing up, as I mentioned, it was Tupac. The content of his lyrics turned a lot of youth, our Lebanese youth, turned them into a gangster lifestyle. They came from parents who were immigrants, they fled war or they fled pornos to work hard in Australia. A lot of these parents own their homes and they're hardworking. And they're wondering, where did their children go wrong? Shaitan isn't always invisible. Shaitan comes in the form of musical artists. And if you don't have an attachment to Rasulullah and Ahlul Bayt, someone else is going to lead you. They say that when two people walk, one always sets the pace. When you walk with someone, either they adjust to your pace or you adjust to theirs. So that's the question tonight. Whose pace are you adjusting to, or are you setting the pace? Are you walking ahead? Are you following Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi? Because people that follow the pace of another person are being led. And Islam taught us to be free. Free of our desire, free of our anger, and free of our waham, our imagination. And what these artists sell to us are basically those three things. Act on your anger, be tough. A man is one who expresses his anger, for the young men that listen. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his akhlaq, he teaches us the man restrains his anger. The man isn't the strongest among you. The man restrains his anger. The true man is not a man who tries to seek as many women as he can. The true man takes care of his women. He has ghira. Ghirat al-rajul min al-iman. He says, rajul, man, one who's upright. So we know that when it comes to akhlaq, there is only one place to go. Now, we know that we said that the first door to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after understanding beliefs is ahkam, the fiqh. So you can't replace the laws of Islam just to make another person feel good, because we said akhlaq is to help people feel good about themselves and be comfortable and treat them well. So for example, some might say, I shook the lady's hand, I felt bad. You can't be in that level. So you always have to maintain the laws of Islam, and that is your foundation for your akhlaq. And akhlaq does not replace it. In fact, I heard a story of a brother. He told me that there was this one lady that approached him online, and, she started to send him text messages, and she got his number, God knows how, and she wanted to get involved with him, and she was married. This brother was shocked. He said, listen, one, you're a married woman. Two, Sayyid Sistani says it's haram to have a female as a friend, so I don't want to be your friend, and I don't want to talk to you. And he told her to get lost, basically, to put it very bluntly. Months later, this lady sent him a message, and she said, I need to talk to you on the phone. He said, oh God, please not again. I thought I got rid of this lady. She said, please I just have a couple minutes and I'll leave you alone. He goes, okay. She said, thank you. He goes, what for? What for, my sister? He goes, the fact that you refused me. I felt embarrassed. And I loved that you didn't just lean towards me. I loved that you were so strong in your iman. And you weren't impolite to me. He didn't disrespect her. He thought, haram, this lady's a miskina, she doesn't know what she's doing, she's probably unhappy in her marriage. He treated her well, even though her proposition was of shaitan and shaitan alone. And she said to him, through you acting like this towards me, I changed my life. I just want to thank you. And that was the end of the conversation. An amazing story. This is here in Sydney. Of course, I can't mention any names, but I know this person to be honest. We said yesterday that ahkam, when it comes to marriage, we know the rights of the man and the woman and things of that nature. But a lot of the time, akhlaq means you forego a few of your rights. And this is an important aspect, and I'm very conscious of time, so I have to close up. We find that, for example, a woman who gives to her house of the cooking and cleaning and money is not wajib upon her. But if a woman wants a special place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she does this out of her akhlaq towards her husband and her family. The husband sees it as a charity and is thankful, but the woman has akhlaq towards her husband, and she knows that the jihad of a woman is to be good to her husband and to allow him to lead. And the akhlaq of a man is to be the leader of his house, but he's Rabb al-Bayt, not Hakim al-Bayt. Rabb is a Jamali word in Islam. Rabb is nurturing. Rabb means to raise. Allah, when we refer to Allah as Rabb, it's always in the sweetness of dua. Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabb. That is when you're very close in dua Kumail, when you say that, it's a very sweet tone. It's not Lord as we translate in English, but there's no better word for it. He sees himself as the Rabb al-Bayt, the nurturer of his house. He's not the boss. This is how the Imams were, this is how Rasulullah was, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa alayhi wa salatu wa salam ajma'in. And in that respect, if you can please recite as-salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's one hadith I'll share, inshallah, and I'll end with that. That there is one person, he goes to Rasulullah, he says, Ya Rasulullah, my wife, let me tell you about my wife. He goes, okay, tell me. He says, my wife is the type of lady that when I come home, she meets me at the door. When I'm going to work, she's first to see me off. My wife is the type of lady that whenever she sees me upset and worried, she looks at me and she says, if you're worried about money, then know that your rizq is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you're worried about your akhirah, may Allah increase your grief and your sorrow and your worry if you're worried about your akhirah. Rasulullah was elated. He was excited. He says, your wife is from Ummal Allah. She's employed by Allah. She is an employee of Rabb al-Alameen. This is the status she had. Just for these few aspects of her akhlaq with her husband. It is beyond prayer. It is beyond fasting. These are just the doors. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, you want to see the iman of a person. It's not in the length of their sajda, their prostration. It is how he treats other people. The message of Islam is a message of goodness to people. Goodness to yourself and others. People naturally came to Islam. In fact, the majority of people that came to Islam wasn't with these online debates that we have, intellectual discussion. Although that played a massive role in our religion, the original Muslims, they came through the akhlaq of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And it is for this reason that we go to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You look at the akhlaq of people inside Karbala. And I'll mention it for a third time. I'm very conscious of time, but inshallah I'd like to tie this into the story of Hur. Now Hur was ordered to take Imam al-Hussein from Kufa, from the door of Kufa, with 1,000 men from his army. And in this respect, the son of Rasulullah, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he says to him, may your mother be bereaved. May your mother cry over you for what you are doing. He says to him, this is the akhlaq of a person from the army of Yazid. He says to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he said, us Arabs, if someone was to swear at our mum or say something negative against our mothers, we say it back. But your mother is Fatima Zahra, I have nothing to say of her and her glorious status. This eventually, this type of akhlaq, when the Imam led to prayer, he ordered everyone to pray behind the Imam, even though he was ordered to take him in. And there are many people that say they don't believe Hur actually kind of knew what was going to happen after that. He was just taking orders from his boss. Because of his respect for the mother of the Imam and the fact he ordered his men to pray behind him, In Karbala, this was his saving grace, where he sees the two sides and he says, I'm standing between heaven and hell. Akhlaq plays a massive role in your guidance. One person was buried by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and the mother of this person announces to her dead son, and onto Jannah you go, my son. Rasulullah snaps at her with a gaze and he said, do you have some ahd with Allah? Do you see the ghaib? She says, no, Ya Rasulullah. He says, know that your son is being squeezed in his grave. And she was shocked. If the Prophet buries you, you think that heaven is guaranteed. He said, your son was a mu'min, but he was harsh with his family. So Allah is squeezing that impurity from him at the moment. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with the akhlaq of Muhammad and al-Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshaAllah, with the light of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, to make us of the people that have goodness to others, so He guides our hearts further. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remind us, through simple reminders like these ones tonight from a very simple person like myself, that we go back to the roots of Islam or what it was about. It began with the goodness of akhlaq, and it will end with the goodness of akhlaq with the Imam, the return of the Imam, where he returns dignity and respect to people of this earth, where the child does not have to work, the woman can travel at night in safety, and everyone has the dignity of a house over their head, food to eat. When he delivers this, he will deliver Islam to them. This is the basis of Islam. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.